Some souls become trapped between worlds not because of unfinished business, but because of the spiritual attitudes they carried in their final moments. Edgar Cayce's readings reveal a disturbing truth. The way you think about death, God, and yourself right now is creating the exact conditions for your own transition, and for some, those conditions become a prison. In his trance states, Cayce encountered souls who couldn't move forward after physical death, suspended in confusion and fear, unable to perceive the light that was always there. These weren't evil people or sinners in the traditional sense. They were individuals whose mental and spiritual attitudes had literally blinded them to the divine assistance waiting on the other side. What makes this revelation even more urgent is that Cayce emphasized these attitudes aren't formed in your final breath. They're being cemented right now, in every choice you make, every belief you hold, every moment you postpone your spiritual development. The question isn't whether you'll face death. It's whether the attitudes you're cultivating today will allow your soul to recognize the way home when that moment comes. What attitudes are you carrying right now that could prevent your peaceful departure? Share your honest reflection in the comments. This conversation might be the wake-up call your soul needs. Edgar Cayce never sugarcoated the reality of what happens when we die. In thousands of readings conducted over 4 decades, he described the transition from physical life to spiritual existence with clinical precision, and what he discovered should make every person reconsider the mental and spiritual attitudes they're fostering right now. Because according to Cayce's revelations, death isn't the great equalizer we imagine it to be. The experience of crossing over is profoundly different depending on the consciousness you've developed during your earthly life. Most people assume that when they die, some external force, God, angels, deceased loved ones, will automatically guide them to where they need to go. Cayce's readings shatter this comfortable assumption. He revealed that the soul's ability to perceive spiritual reality after death is determined by the spiritual sight it developed before death. If you've spent your life cultivating certain mental attitudes, particularly skepticism about the afterlife, materialistic thinking, or spiritual pride, you may literally be unable to see the helpers and the light that await you. Think about that for a moment. The divine assistance is there, the pathway home is illuminated. But if your consciousness has been trained to reject anything beyond the material world, if you've hardened yourself against spiritual truth, if you've convinced yourself that you alone determine reality, your soul may stand in the presence of angels and perceive only darkness. Cayce described encountering souls in his psychic work who had been trapped in what he called the borderland between Earth and the higher spiritual realms. These weren't demons or lost ghosts in the horror movie sense. They were ordinary people, educated, successful, even religious in some cases, whose fundamental attitudes about existence prevented them from accepting the help being offered to them. One of the most haunting aspects of these accounts is that these souls often didn't even realize they had died. Their materialistic consciousness was so strong that they continued trying to interact with the physical world, bewildered by why no one could see or hear them. What specific attitudes did Cayce identify as the most dangerous? The first and perhaps most prevalent is what he called self-will. The absolute conviction that you are the master of your own destiny, that you need no higher power, that your intellect and determination are sufficient for all challenges. In life, this attitude might make you feel strong and independent. In death, it becomes a cage. When the soul that has lived by self-will alone encounters the dissolution of the body, it has no framework for surrendering to a higher intelligence. It continues trying to control, to navigate by its own understanding, rejecting the guidance of spiritual beings it cannot rationally explain. Cayce was explicit about this in his readings. The soul that has rejected dependence on God during life will struggle to accept divine assistance after life. And here's what makes this so insidious. Our culture celebrates self-will. We're told to be self-made, to trust only ourselves, to question everything external to our own reasoning. We've been spiritually conditioned to reject the very humility that could save us in our moment of greatest need. The second attitude Cayce identified is materialism, not just the love of material things, but the deep conviction that only the physical world is real. When you've spent decades training your consciousness to reject anything that can't be measured, weighed, or scientifically proven, death becomes a catastrophic shock. The materialist soul finds itself suddenly in a realm where thought creates reality, where consciousness operates without a physical brain, where beings exist without bodies. Everything this soul knows tells it this can't be happening. So rather than adapting to the new reality, it denies the reality itself, and in that denial it remains trapped. Have you built your entire worldview on the assumption that consciousness ends with brain death? Have you mocked or dismissed those who speak of spiritual experiences? Have you made skepticism your identity? If so, Cayce's readings suggest you're not just wrong about reality, you're programming your soul for a traumatic and potentially prolonged transition. The third destructive attitude is what Cayce called condemning judgment, particularly self-condemnation. This might surprise you because we often think of excessive guilt or shame as evidence of spiritual sensitivity. But Cayce's readings reveal something darker. The soul that cannot forgive itself, that insists on its own unworthiness, may refuse to accept the forgiveness being offered after death. These souls stand before the divine light and turn away, convinced they don't deserve it. Their humility isn't spiritual, it's inverted pride, a stubborn insistence on their own judgment over God's mercy. Think about the people you know who carry decades of shame, who define themselves by their failures, who cannot accept that they might be worthy of love and redemption. Now imagine that consciousness encountering the unconditional love of the divine after death. Rather than relief, it experiences cognitive dissonance so severe that it retreats into darkness, seeking the punishment it believes it deserves. Cayce described souls who created their own hellish experiences not because God condemned them, but because they condemned themselves and could not accept any other verdict. Are you holding on to guilt that you've used to define your identity? Are you more comfortable with shame than with grace? This isn't humility, it's spiritual self-sabotage that could prevent you from accepting the very salvation you claim to seek. The fourth attitude is sectarian certainty, the absolute conviction that your particular religious understanding is the only valid path and that all others are condemned. Cayce encountered souls who died as rigid fundamentalists of various faiths and found themselves unable to accept assistance from spiritual beings who didn't match their theological expectations. A Christian who expected only Jesus to greet them might reject help from angelic beings they can't categorize. A materialist atheist might refuse guidance from anyone claiming to represent a divine authority they don't believe exists. An adherent of one Eastern tradition might be unable to perceive helpers who manifest in forms associated with a different tradition. The irony is profound. The more certain you are that you alone possess the truth about the afterlife, the more likely you are to be blind to its actual reality. Cayce's readings emphasize that truth is universal, but manifests in ways adapted to each soul's understanding. The helpers on the other side meet you where you are, but they cannot help you if your certainty has made you unable to recognize help that doesn't match your preconceptions. Do you believe that your understanding of spiritual reality is complete and final? Do you look at other traditions with contempt rather than curiosity? This attitude doesn't make you spiritually pure. It makes you spiritually rigid, and rigidity in the soul is as dangerous as rigidity in the body. The fifth and perhaps most subtle destructive attitude is what Cayce described as spiritual procrastination, the habit of knowing what you should do spiritually but perpetually postponing it. In his readings, he emphasized that the moment of death doesn't transform your consciousness, it reveals it. If you've spent your life intending to meditate but never making time, intending to forgive but holding on to resentments, intending to serve others but remaining self-focused, death won't suddenly make you spiritually ready. You'll face the transition with the same scattered, unprepared consciousness you've been tolerating for decades. This is the attitude that might be the most common and the most dangerous because it masquerades as harmlessness. You're not rejecting spirituality, you're just busy. You're not materialistic, you just need to handle practical matters first. You're not self-willed, you just need to get through this current challenge before you focus on spiritual development. But Cayce's readings suggest that this perpetual postponement creates a consciousness that, at death, will continue postponing. unable to recognize that the time for preparation has ended and the time for transition has arrived. How many years have you been planning to get serious about your spiritual life? How many times have you told yourself you'll meditate regularly, pray daily, study sacred texts, serve others selflessly, starting next month, next year, after this project, after retirement? Every day of postponement is a day spent programming your consciousness to delay, to wait, to not quite commit. And when death comes, that programmed consciousness will delay and wait and not quite commit to the transition itself. But here's what makes Cayce's revelation both terrifying and hopeful. None of these attitudes are permanent. The soul trapped by self-will can learn surrender. The materialist consciousness can be awakened to spiritual reality. The self-condemning soul can accept forgiveness. The rigid believer can embrace truth beyond their dogma. The procrastinator can finally act. But, and this is crucial, the time to transform these attitudes is now, while you still have the friction and feedback of physical existence to work with. Cayce emphasized in his readings that we incarnate precisely to develop our consciousness under challenging conditions. Physical life, with all its limitations and difficulties, is the training ground for the soul. Death is graduation day, but you don't cram for this exam in your final moments. The consciousness you've been building day by day, choice by choice, attitude by attitude, is the consciousness you'll carry into the transition. So the question isn't just about what attitudes prevent peaceful departure. It's about what attitudes are you cultivating right now today, in this present moment. Because if Cayce's readings are accurate, and thousands of verified cases suggest they are, then you're not just living your life, you're programming your death experience. Consider the person who spends every day reinforcing their materialistic worldview, their intellectual superiority, their certainty that consciousness is just brain chemistry. They're not just wrong about metaphysics, they're constructing a perceptual prison they'll inhabit when their brain stops functioning, but their consciousness continues. Every smug dismissal of spiritual experiences, every ridiculing of faith, every prideful assertion of their rational superiority is another bar in that prison. Consider the person carrying decades of shame, constantly rehashing their failures, unable to forgive themselves for mistakes made years or decades ago. They think they're being humble, conscientious, spiritually aware. They don't realize they're building a psychological pattern that will cause them to reject divine mercy when it's offered, to flee from the light because they have convinced themselves they belong in darkness. Consider the religious fundamentalist who believes salvation belongs only to their specific sect, their particular interpretation, their exclusive truth. They think their certainty makes them faithful. They don't understand that their rigidity is creating a filter that will screen out any spiritual help that doesn't precisely match their expectations. And spiritual reality is far too vast and diverse to fit in anyone's theological box. Consider the perpetual procrastinator who always has a good reason for why today isn't the day to start living spiritually. They think they're being practical, realistic, balanced. They don't see that they're training their consciousness to always wait for better conditions, to always delay the commitment, to always postpone the transformation, a pattern that won't suddenly reverse when they take their last breath. If you recognize yourself in any of these patterns, don't despair, but don't you dare keep postponing. Cayce's readings emphasized that recognizing these destructive attitudes is the first step to transforming them. But recognition without action is just spiritual entertainment. You're reading this information right now. You're becoming aware of how your current attitudes might create your future reality. What are you going to do with that awareness? Cayce recommended specific practices for developing the attitudes that allow peaceful transition. First, daily meditation. Not as a relaxation technique, but as practice in surrendering control, in opening to guidance beyond your conscious mind, in experiencing consciousness as something more than brain activity. Every time you successfully quiet your thoughts and touch that deeper awareness, you're proving to yourself that you are more than your physical body. You're building the spiritual sight you'll need when physical sight ends. Second, active service to others, specifically, service that requires you to put aside your own agenda and respond to genuine need. Every time you serve without expectation of return, you're weakening the grip of self-will. You're teaching your soul that there is something more important than your own desires, your own timeline, your own priorities. This is the practice of surrender, and surrender is the key that unlocks peaceful transition. Third, conscious forgiveness, both of others and yourself. Cayce emphasized that holding resentments or self-condemnation is like wrapping yourself in chains before trying to swim. You may still be able to move, but the effort is exhausting, and you're constantly at risk of drowning. Practice forgiveness daily, not because the offenses don't matter, but because freedom matters more. Every act of genuine forgiveness loosens one link in the chains you've been forging. Fourth, study of diverse spiritual traditions, not to become confused or uncommitted, but to recognize the universal truths that appear in all genuine spiritual paths. When you can see the same essential teaching appearing in Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, indigenous traditions and esoteric philosophy, you're expanding your spiritual vocabulary. You're learning to recognize truth in multiple forms. This flexibility of understanding is crucial because the helpers on the other side may manifest in ways that don't match your cultural or religious expectations. The soul that can recognize divine love in many forms will never mistake it for something to fear or reject. Fifth, and perhaps most importantly, develop the habit of gratitude and wonder. Cayce emphasized that the soul that has learned to see life as a gift, that approaches each day with genuine appreciation for existence itself, is preparing for joyful transition. Gratitude is the opposite of materialism. It acknowledges that everything you have is given, not earned or owned. Wonder is the opposite of certainty. It remains open to mystery, to revelation, to realities beyond current understanding. The soul that practices gratitude and wonder daily is building the attitudes that will allow it to greet death, not with fear, but with curiosity about the next great adventure. But here's the uncomfortable truth that Cayce never shied away from. You can know all of this intellectually and still be completely unprepared spiritually. Information doesn't transform consciousness, practice does. You can read every book about the afterlife, watch every video about near-death experiences, memorize every teaching about spiritual development, and still carry the exact attitudes that will trap you between worlds if you never actually do the inner work. Are you really ready to examine your attitudes honestly? Not the attitudes you wish you had, not the attitudes you present to others, but the actual operating beliefs that govern your daily choices. Because those real attitudes, not your spiritual aspirations, are what you're taking with you when you die. When you face a challenge, do you automatically try to control it yourself, or do you genuinely seek divine guidance? When you encounter suffering, do you immediately retreat into material explanations, or can you perceive it as part of a larger spiritual pattern? When you make a mistake, do you practice forgiveness, or do you add it to the growing list of reasons you're unworthy? When you encounter beliefs different from your own, do you see threat or opportunity? When you consider spiritual development, do you engage with it now or add it to your list of someday intentions? Your honest answers to these questions are a more accurate preview of your death experience than any religious affiliation, any philosophical knowledge, any claimed belief. Because according to Cayce's readings, consciousness is what you practice, not what you profess. You're building your afterlife experience with every thought, every choice, every habitual response to life's challenges. And here's the final unavoidable reality. You will die. Not someday in the distant future, not when you're finally ready, not after you've had time to prepare. Death comes according to its own timing, indifferent to your spiritual readiness. The only question is whether the consciousness you've been building will allow you to perceive and accept the help that will be offered, or whether the attitudes you've been nurturing will blind you to the very light you've claimed to seek. Cayce's readings weren't meant to terrify you. They were meant to wake you up while there's still time to change. Every soul, he insisted, eventually finds its way home. But the journey can be swift and joyful, guided by loving helpers through realms of increasing light and understanding, or it can be prolonged and agonizing, as the soul struggles against its own programming, unable to see the assistance surrounding it, trapped by attitudes it thought were strengths, but were actually chains. Which journey are you preparing for? Not which journey do you hope for or wish for or believe you deserve. Which journey are you actually preparing for with the attitudes and practices that define your daily life? This isn't about becoming perfect. It's not about never having doubts or struggles. It's about the direction of your development, the genuine effort towards spiritual growth, the willingness to recognize and transform destructive patterns before they calcify into the structure of your consciousness. Cayce emphasized that sincere effort, even with imperfect results, creates a soul ready for peaceful transition. It's spiritual procrastination, willful blindness, and prideful certainty that create the conditions for souls to become trapped. So I'll ask you one final time, and this time, I need you to answer not to me but to yourself with complete honesty. What attitudes are you carrying right now that could prevent your peaceful departure? And more importantly, what are you going to do about them, not someday, but starting today? Because the tragedy isn't dying with these destructive attitudes. The tragedy is living another day, another week, another year with the awareness that they're sabotaging your spiritual development and choosing to do nothing about it. Cayce's readings offer a blueprint for transformation, but the construction work is yours alone. The helpers on the other side can guide you through death, but they cannot force you to see them, to trust them, or to follow them. That capability must be developed now, in the time you still have, through the attitudes you choose to cultivate in this present moment. Your death experience is being written by your daily choices. Make sure you're writing a story of liberation, not imprisonment. Make sure the attitudes you're reinforcing are ones that will serve your soul when everything else falls away. Make sure that when you take your final breath in this body, the consciousness you've built will be able to perceive the light that's always been waiting, and the helpers who have never stopped calling you home. The time for spiritual preparation isn't after you get serious diagnosis, not when you retire, not when life slows down. The time is now. The choice is yours. The stakes couldn't be higher. What will you do with this awareness? Your body is sending you signals right now that you're probably ignoring, subtle shifts that Edgar Cayce warned would mark the beginning of your spiritual transformation. In his trance readings, Cayce revealed that spiritual awakening isn't just a mental or emotional experience. It's a complete physiological revolution that rewrites your cellular structure, changes how your nervous system processes reality, and even alters the electromagnetic field surrounding your physical form. Most people experiencing these bodily changes panic, thinking they're sick or losing their minds, when in fact they're undergoing the exact metamorphosis Cayce described as essential for accessing higher consciousness. Your throat tightening during meditation, that inexplicable pressure at your forehead, the sudden sensitivity to foods you've eaten for years, the disrupted sleep patterns. These aren't random symptoms. They're your body's response to frequencies of divine energy that are literally incompatible with who you used to be. The question isn't whether you're changing. The question is whether you understand what's happening to you and why ignoring these signs could abort your spiritual evolution at its most critical phase. What physical changes have you noticed lately that you can't explain? Share your experience in the comments. Your story might be the confirmation someone else desperately needs. When Edgar Cayce entered his legendary trance states, he did more than access information about people's health and spiritual conditions. He mapped out the precise physiological changes that occur when a human being shifts from ordinary consciousness into alignment with divine reality. What he discovered should fundamentally change how you interpret every strange sensation, every unexplained shift, every mysterious symptom your body has been manifesting since your spiritual journey intensified. Because according to Cayce, your physical form isn't just along for the ride during spiritual awakening. It's the primary battleground where the transformation either succeeds or fails. Cayce explained in his readings that the human body operates on 7 major spiritual centers, what Eastern traditions call chakras, but which he described in more physiological terms as glandular systems directly connected to spiritual consciousness. These aren't abstract energy points. They're actual endocrine glands. The gonads, the cells of Leydig, the adrenals, the thymus, the thyroid, the pineal, and the pituitary. When you begin awakening spiritually, Cayce revealed, these glands start functioning differently. They begin producing different hormonal signatures. They start resonating at frequencies they've never accessed before. And your body, conditioned by years of operating in purely material consciousness, doesn't know what to do with this new input. This is why so many people experiencing spiritual awakening suddenly develop strange physical symptoms that doctors can't diagnose. The medical establishment is looking for disease. But what's actually happening is that your endocrine system is recalibrating to accommodate higher dimensional awareness. Cayce saw this pattern repeatedly in his readings. People whose spiritual practices were triggering profound glandular shifts that manifested as inexplicable fatigue, mysterious pains, sudden sensitivities, and altered states of consciousness that felt more physical than mental. Let's start with what happens to your nervous system during spiritual awakening, because this is where most people first notice something has changed. Cayce described the human nervous system as having two primary aspects: the cerebrospinal system, which governs conscious, voluntary action, and the sympathetic nervous system, which controls unconscious, involuntary processes. During spiritual awakening, these two systems begin communicating in ways they never have before. The barrier between conscious and unconscious processing starts dissolving. This means you might suddenly become hyper-aware of your heartbeat, your breathing, the subtle movements of your digestive system, all processes that normally happen completely outside conscious awareness. But it goes deeper than mere awareness. Cayce revealed that as spiritual energy begins moving through the body, what he called the Kundalini force, though he used more cautious terminology, it travels along the spine and activates each spiritual center sequentially. This isn't a gentle process. When dormant spiritual energy suddenly awakens and begins its upward journey through your nervous system, your body responds as if it's under attack. You might experience inexplicable rushes of heat, particularly along your spine. You might feel electrical sensations shooting through your limbs. Some people describe it as feeling like their entire nervous system is being rewired, because that's essentially what's happening. The neural pathways that served your old consciousness are being upgraded to handle the bandwidth of your new awareness. Now here's what Cayce emphasized that most spiritual teachers leave out. This process can be dangerous if you're not prepared for it. Forcing spiritual awakening through intense practices without proper physical preparation can literally damage your nervous system. Cayce saw cases of people who pushed too hard, too fast, and ended up with neurological problems, psychological breaks, and physical ailments that plagued them for years. The body needs time to adjust. The glands need to gradually strengthen. The nervous system requires careful, patient development. This is why Cayce always recommended balanced spiritual practice, meditation combined with proper diet, adequate rest, physical exercise, and regular grounding activities that keep you connected to material reality, even as you're expanding into spiritual dimensions. Your pineal gland becomes particularly active during spiritual awakening. Cayce identified this tiny gland, located deep in the center of your brain, as the seat of spiritual vision, what religious traditions call the third eye. When you begin awakening, the pineal gland starts producing different neurochemicals. It becomes more sensitive to light, to electromagnetic frequencies, to subtle energies that most people never perceive. This is why people undergoing spiritual awakening often develop extreme light sensitivity. Bright lights feel painful. You might need to wear sunglasses indoors. Fluorescent lighting becomes unbearable. You're not becoming weak or overly sensitive. Your pineal gland is literally operating at a higher frequency, and the light that never bothered you before is now overwhelming to your enhanced perception. The pineal gland also regulates your sleep-wake cycles through melatonin production. During spiritual awakening, these cycles get completely disrupted. You might find yourself waking at exactly 3 in the morning, night after night. You might sleep deeply for 12 hours and still wake exhausted. Or you might discover you need far less sleep than before, operating on just a few hours, while feeling more energized than ever. Cayce explained that this happens because your consciousness is literally doing work in other dimensions while your body sleeps. You're not just resting. You're traveling, learning, processing information on planes of existence that require tremendous energy to access. Your physical body is recalibrating its rest requirements to support this expanded activity. Then there's what happens to your thyroid during spiritual awakening. The thyroid gland, located in your throat, governs metabolism, energy levels, and according to Cayce, the will center, your capacity to express divine truth and align your personal will with spiritual purpose. When you start awakening, your thyroid often goes haywire. You might develop hyperthyroid symptoms, racing heart, anxiety, weight loss, trembling hands, even though medical tests show your thyroid function is normal. Or you might experience the opposite: profound fatigue, weight gain, depression, difficulty concentrating. What's actually happening is that your thyroid is attempting to process the new frequency of spiritual will moving through your system. Cayce revealed that the throat center is where most people's spiritual development gets blocked. Why? Because spiritual truth demands expression. Awakening isn't meant to be a private, internal experience. It's meant to transform how you speak, what you create, how you use your voice in the world. If you're awakening spiritually but still lying to yourself, still swallowing your truth, still refusing to speak what you know, your thyroid bears the burden of that contradiction. The gland literally becomes inflamed, trying to process spiritual energy that you won't allow to express itself. This is why Cayce emphasized that spiritual development must include honest self-expression and authentic communication. Your body can't complete its transformation if you're spiritually awakening in secret while presenting a false face to the world. Let's talk about what happens to your solar plexus, the adrenal center that Cayce associated with personal power and emotional processing. During spiritual awakening, your adrenals become hypersensitive to stress, conflict, and negative energy. You might notice you can no longer tolerate angry people. Violent movies become unwatchable. Gossip makes you physically nauseous. Arguments drain you for days. Your nervous system is actually rewiring itself to operate from a higher baseline frequency and lower vibrational experiences. Conflict, fear, anger, manipulation now register as physical toxins. Your body is rejecting them the same way it would reject spoiled food. This adrenal sensitivity also means you might develop sudden anxiety or panic attacks that seem to come from nowhere. Cayce explained that as you awaken, you become more permeable to the emotional and mental atmosphere around you. You're literally feeling other people's fear, absorbing the collective anxiety of your environment. Your adrenals are responding to threats that aren't even yours. This is why grounding practices become essential during awakening. Spending time in nature, physical exercise, working with your hands, eating root vegetables, walking barefoot on earth. These activities help discharge the excess stimulation your adrenals are processing and reconnect your upgraded nervous system to the stabilizing frequency of the physical world. Your heart center, the thymus gland, undergoes perhaps the most profound transformation during spiritual awakening. Cayce taught that the heart is the seat of Christ consciousness, the point where divine love enters and transforms human awareness. As you awaken, your thymus gland, which most doctors believe becomes inactive after childhood, suddenly reactivates. You might experience strange sensations in your chest, pressure, warmth, expansive feelings that seem too big for your ribcage to contain. Some people feel an actual ache in their heart, not from disease but from the stretching of their capacity to love beyond personal attachments into universal compassion. This heart activation changes how you relate to suffering, both your own and others. You might find yourself weeping at news stories that wouldn't have moved you before. The pain of strangers feels personal. You can't watch violence without feeling it in your own body. You're not becoming emotionally unstable. Your heart center is literally expanding to hold more of the world's pain, because that's what divine love does. It includes everything, rejects nothing, transforms suffering through complete acceptance. But this expansion is physically demanding. Your heart has to learn to pulse at a different rhythm, to hold contradictions that would have broken you before, to love without the protection of emotional numbness. Now we need to address what Cayce warned about regarding sexual energy during spiritual awakening, because this is where many people's transformations go off track. The gonads, your sexual organs, represent the root spiritual center, the foundation of the entire energy system. Cayce taught that sexual energy is literally the same force as spiritual energy. It's creative life force that can either be expressed through physical procreation or transmuted upward through the spiritual centers for higher consciousness development. During awakening, your relationship to sexual energy completely changes. Some people experience a dramatic increase in sexual desire as their root center activates. Others lose all interest in sex as that energy spontaneously redirects upward. Neither response is right or wrong, but both require conscious management. Cayce warned that indulging in sexual expression purely for physical pleasure during intense spiritual awakening can actually reverse your progress. The energy that should be moving upward to activate your higher centers gets repeatedly discharged downward, keeping you locked in material consciousness no matter how much you meditate. Conversely, repressing sexual energy through shame or rigid control creates blockages that prevent spiritual energy from rising at all. The key, Cayce taught, is to approach sexual energy with reverence and intentionality. If you engage sexually during spiritual awakening, do so with the conscious intention of merging spiritual and physical love, of honoring the creative force you're exchanging with another person. If you choose celibacy or abstinence, do so from empowerment, not fear, consciously redirecting that potent creative energy towards spiritual development, artistic expression, or service. Your body is navigating the most primal force in existence. How you relate to sexual energy during awakening will determine whether your transformation elevates you or derails you. Here's something Cayce revealed that most people miss. The bodily changes of spiritual awakening happen in waves, not in a straight line. You'll have periods of intense physical symptoms, fatigue, sensitivity, mysterious pains, followed by periods of feeling better than you've ever felt in your life. Then the symptoms return, often more intense than before. This isn't regression. It's how the body integrates new frequencies. You upgrade, you stabilize, you upgrade again. Each wave processes a deeper layer of transformation. Each cycle of symptoms means another aspect of your old physical-spiritual configuration is dissolving to make room for higher function. The mistake people make is treating these symptoms as problems to fix rather than signs of progress to support. When fatigue hits during a spiritual awakening phase, your body isn't sick. It's diverting enormous resources to neurological and glandular restructuring. Rest is required, not resisted. When you develop food sensitivities, your digestive system isn't failing. It's becoming more discerning about what frequencies you're literally incorporating into your cells. Your body is refusing to build itself from lower vibrational materials. When sleep patterns disrupt, your consciousness isn't malfunctioning. It's learning to operate across multiple dimensions simultaneously. Cayce gave specific guidance for supporting the body through these changes, and his recommendations remain as relevant now as when he gave them decades ago. First, alkalize your diet. Spiritual awakening creates tremendous acidity in the body as old cellular patterns break down. Emphasize vegetables, particularly leafy greens. Reduce meat, especially red meat, because the density and frequency of animal flesh can overwhelm a nervous system trying to attune to higher vibrations. Second, ensure proper elimination. The body is releasing toxins, old emotions stored in tissue, energetic debris from your former consciousness. If your bowels, kidneys, and skin aren't eliminating efficiently, these toxins recirculate and intensify your symptoms. Third, massage and bodywork become essential. Energy moving through your system can create painful knots and blockages in muscle tissue. Gentle, regular massage helps these releases complete rather than getting stuck. Cayce also emphasized the critical importance of spending time in nature during spiritual awakening. Your body is learning to resonate with higher frequencies, but it's still a physical organism that needs grounding in earth energy. Walk barefoot on grass, sit with your back against trees, put your hands in soil. These aren't quaint spiritual practices. They're essential physiological support for a nervous system that's operating at capacity. Nature provides the electromagnetic grounding that stabilizes your system, so the upward spiritual energies don't destabilize you. Water takes on new significance during awakening. Cayce taught that water is deeply connected to spiritual consciousness and emotional processing. You need more water than usual to support the increased activity in your glands and nervous system. But beyond just drinking water, being in water becomes important. Baths, swimming, standing in rain. Water helps discharge excess electrical activity from your system and provides a medium for releasing emotional and energetic blockages that your body is processing. Let's address what happens to your brain structure during spiritual awakening, because this is where the changes become truly remarkable. Cayce described the pituitary gland as the master gland of the spiritual system, the point where divine consciousness directly interfaces with human awareness. During awakening, the pituitary doesn't just change function, it physically changes structure. Modern neuroscience is beginning to confirm what Cayce saw in his readings. Intense spiritual practice literally rewires the brain, creates new neural pathways, and can even generate new brain cells in areas associated with higher cognition and emotional regulation. But this neural restructuring creates what Cayce called the breaking up of old thought patterns, and it's not comfortable. You might experience periods where you can't think clearly, where memory becomes unreliable, where concentration feels impossible. Your brain isn't deteriorating, it's reorganizing. The neural networks that supported your old way of perceiving reality are being dismantled so new networks aligned with expanded awareness can form. This is why spiritual teachers across traditions emphasize the importance of not making major life decisions during intense awakening periods. Your cognitive function is temporarily compromised not by illness but by upgrade. The physical changes of spiritual awakening also affect your sensory perception in ways that can be disorienting. Your vision might change, not in terms of needing new glasses, but in what you actually perceive. Some people start seeing auras, energy fields around living things. Others see geometric patterns, especially when closing their eyes or in low light. Some notice that colors appear more vivid, almost overwhelming in their intensity. These aren't hallucinations. Your visual cortex is processing a broader spectrum of information than it did before. The upgrade in pineal gland function directly affects what your brain interprets as visible light. Hearing changes too. You might develop tinnitus, ringing, buzzing, or high-pitched tones in your ears that medical exams can't explain. Cayce taught that these sounds are often the actual vibration of your nervous system, adjusting to higher frequencies. You're literally hearing the hum of your own spiritual transformation. Some people become able to hear sounds at frequencies they couldn't detect before. The subtle hum of electrical devices, the resonance of crystals, even what they describe as celestial music or tones with no physical source. Your auditory system is expanding its range to include non-physical sound. Your sense of smell can become dramatically heightened during awakening. Perfumes, chemicals, artificial fragrances that never bothered you before become intolerable. You can smell disease on people, sense emotional states through scent, detect subtle odors no one else perceives. This olfactory sensitivity is connected to the opening of your intuitive faculties. Smell is one of the most primitive senses, directly connected to the limbic system and emotional processing. As you awaken, this ancient sensory pathway becomes a channel for spiritual information, disguised as physical scent. Even your sense of time changes during spiritual awakening. Cayce explained that linear time is a construct of material consciousness. As you awaken to spiritual reality, you begin experiencing time differently. Minutes might feel like hours. Hours disappear in what seems like moments. You might have experiences of being in two time periods simultaneously, or sensing future events before they happen, or remembering things that haven't occurred yet. Your brain's temporal processing centers are adjusting to perceive the eternal now that exists beyond chronological sequence. This temporal disorientation is another sign that your consciousness is outgrowing the limitations of physical reality. If you're like most people who hit the subscribe button, you're on this journey right now. The changes we're discussing aren't theoretical. They're happening in your body, altering your glands, rewiring your nervous system, expanding your perception. And you need to understand what comes next, because the physical transformation has a purpose beyond just making you feel different. Cayce revealed that all these bodily changes, The glandular shifts, the nervous system rewiring, the sensory expansion are preparing you for one thing: to become a clearer channel for divine consciousness to operate in physical reality. Your body is being refined so that Christ consciousness can express through you more fully. The old physical structure, built to serve an ego operating in separation and survival, can't accommodate the frequency of divine love and wisdom, so it has to be rebuilt from the inside out. Every uncomfortable symptom, every mysterious change, every moment of feeling like you're falling apart is actually your body being reconstructed to house a more expanded version of who you truly are. But here's the part where most people's awakenings stall out. They focus so much on the spiritual experiences that they neglect the physical vessel undergoing the transformation. They meditate for hours, but eat garbage. They pursue enlightenment, but ignore their body's desperate signals for rest, movement, proper nutrition, and grounding. Cayce was emphatic about this. Spiritual awakening without physical care is dangerous and ultimately unsustainable. Your body isn't separate from your spirit. It's the instrument through which spirit expresses in this dimension. If you don't maintain the instrument, the music stops. This means you have to become ruthlessly honest about what your body needs during this process. If you're exhausted, you rest, even if your mind is screaming that you're being lazy. If you're craving certain foods, you pay attention. Your body's wisdom is guiding you toward the nutrients required for your current stage of transformation. If you need to move, you move, even if that means interrupting your meditation practice to go dance or walk or swim. The spiritual journey isn't about transcending the body. It's about bringing spirit and body into such perfect alignment that they function as one integrated system of divine expression. Cayce also warned about a specific trap that catches many people during the bodily changes of awakening: the temptation to seek medical intervention for every symptom. Yes, genuine illness requires medical attention. But many awakening symptoms, the fatigue, the sensitivity, the altered sleep, the mysterious pains, aren't diseases to be cured. They're transformations to be supported. When you rush to suppress every uncomfortable sensation with medication, you can actually interrupt the natural process of spiritual physical integration your body is attempting. This doesn't mean ignoring serious symptoms or refusing appropriate medical care. It means developing the discernment to recognize when your body is in crisis versus when it's in transition. One of the most challenging aspects of the bodily changes during awakening is that they often make you feel more vulnerable, not more powerful. You might have imagined that spiritual awakening would make you stronger, more resilient, capable of handling anything. Instead, you find yourself needing more sleep, unable to tolerate stress, sensitive to everything, sometimes barely able to function in the regular world. This feels like failure. But Cayce taught that this increased vulnerability is actually increased sensitivity, and sensitivity is the prerequisite for higher consciousness. You have to feel more to perceive more. You have to become permeable to subtle energies before you can work with them consciously. The vulnerability is the gateway. Here's what you need to understand about the timeline of these bodily changes. They don't end. Spiritual awakening isn't a destination you reach where everything stabilizes and you feel enlightened forever after. It's a continuous process of dying and rebirthing at the cellular level. Each expansion of consciousness requires another round of physical adjustment. Each time you access a new dimension of awareness, your body has to upgrade its capacity to anchor that awareness in form. This means the symptoms, the sensitivity, the mysterious changes, they come in cycles throughout your entire life as you continue evolving. The difference is that once you understand what's happening, you can work with the process instead of being victimized by it. Cayce gave one particularly important instruction about the bodily changes of awakening. Keep records. Write down what you're experiencing physically. Note the patterns. When symptoms intensify, what triggers them? What helps them resolve? Track your dreams, because your sleep experiences directly reflect what's happening in your body's spiritual transformation. Monitor your energy levels, your emotional states, your sensory changes. This documentation serves multiple purposes. It helps you recognize patterns and cycles so you can anticipate and prepare for intense phases. It provides evidence of your transformation when you doubt your progress, and it becomes a map that can guide others who follow the same path. There's also a social dimension to the bodily changes of awakening that Cayce addressed. As you transform physically, you become increasingly incompatible with certain people, places, and activities. The bar you used to enjoy feels toxic now. Friends who engage in gossip and drama drain you for days after seeing them. Your workplace environment, which you tolerated before, now makes you physically ill. These aren't personality clashes. Your body is operating at a different frequency, and when you force it into lower vibrational environments, it responds with physical distress. This is your body's wisdom, protecting your transformation by making it uncomfortable to backslide into old patterns. But this means you face a difficult choice. Do you honor what your body needs, even if it means disappointing people, leaving jobs, ending relationships, and restructuring your entire life? Or do you override your body's signals to maintain external stability? Cayce was clear that spiritual awakening always requires letting go of what no longer serves your evolution, and your body's increasing sensitivity is designed to make that letting go non-negotiable. When being around certain people literally makes you sick, you can't maintain those relationships without aborting your awakening. When your workplace environment triggers physical symptoms, you can't stay there and complete your transformation. Your body is forcing your life into alignment with your soul's purpose by rejecting everything that contradicts that purpose. This is where we get to the real question, the one that determines whether the bodily changes of your spiritual awakening lead to transformation or just to years of confusing symptoms. Are you willing to completely restructure your life around what your body needs to complete this process? Because here's what Cayce revealed: the physical changes will continue escalating until you make the external changes they're demanding. Your body will become more sensitive, more symptomatic, more insistent until you finally listen. You can resist for years, managing symptoms, pushing through, trying to maintain your old life while privately awakening. Or you can surrender to the transformation, let your old life die and rebuild from the foundation, up in alignment with who you're becoming. Most people choose the middle path. They make some changes but cling to others. They clean up their diet but stay in toxic relationships. They start meditating but remain in soul-crushing careers. They honor their sensitivity in private but pretend to be unchanged in public. And this middle path creates a specific kind of suffering, chronic, unresolved symptoms that never quite become crises but never quite resolve either. Your body stuck between two frequencies, never able to fully anchor the higher consciousness you're accessing because you won't release the lower consciousness patterns you're maintaining. The bodily changes of spiritual awakening are an invitation to total authenticity. Your physical form is being reconfigured to express divine truth, and it cannot complete that reconfiguration while you're still living lies, even comfortable, socially acceptable lies. Every time you pretend to be who you used to be, every time you suppress what you know to maintain others' approval, every time you override your body's guidance to meet external expectations, you create interference in the transformation process. And that interference manifests as physical symptoms because your body is literally rejecting the frequency of inauthenticity. So what's actually happening in your body right now? Are the strange sensations, the unexplained symptoms, the mysterious changes signs of illness or signals of awakening? Are you breaking down or breaking through? The answer depends entirely on what you do next. Cayce taught that spiritual awakening is a choice that must be made repeatedly, in each moment, with each decision about how you treat your body, what you eat, where you go, who you spend time with, what work you do, how you speak, what you create. The physical transformation supports the spiritual evolution, but only if you support the physical transformation. Your body is already different than it was when you started reading this. The spiritual centers are already more active. The glands are already producing different chemistry. The nervous system is already processing reality at a higher frequency. The only question is whether you'll consciously collaborate with what's already begun or unconsciously resist it. Because resistance doesn't stop the process, it just makes it more painful, more confusing, more prolonged. Surrender accelerates it, clarifies it, and allows your body to complete what it's attempting with grace instead of crisis. The dying can hear you, even when their eyes are closed, even when they seem unconscious, even in their final breaths. And according to Edgar Cayce's psychic readings, what you say in those sacred moments doesn't just affect their comfort in this world. It can literally anchor their soul to physical suffering or liberate it into divine light. For over 40 years, Cayce entered deep trance states and documented what actually happens to human consciousness during the transition we call death, revealing that our words carry vibrational frequencies that either ease or obstruct the soul's journey home. Most people, even with the best intentions, unknowingly speak phrases that create spiritual confusion, fear, and resistance in the dying person's consciousness, trapping them between dimensions when they should be ascending. The difference between a peaceful, luminous transition and a traumatic, disoriented one often comes down to a single sentence spoken at the bedside. What are you saying to those you love as they prepare to leave? Share your perspective in the comments, because understanding this ancient wisdom could transform the most important conversation you'll ever have. There's a profound mystery unfolding in every hospital room, every hospice bed, every sacred space where someone draws their final breaths. While medical professionals monitor vital signs and family members whisper their goodbyes, something far more significant is happening in dimensions invisible to physical eyes. Edgar Cayce, the most documented psychic in American history, spent decades exploring these hidden realms of consciousness, and what he discovered about the dying process contradicts nearly everything our culture teaches us about how to support someone in their final hours. Cayce's readings revealed that consciousness doesn't simply switch off at death like a light bulb. Instead, the soul begins a gradual separation from the physical body, a process that can start hours or even days before the final heartbeat. During this transition period, the dying person exists simultaneously in two realities: the physical dimension we can see and touch, and spiritual dimensions that are becoming increasingly vivid and real to them. They're already beginning to perceive the light, to sense the presence of loved ones who've crossed over before them, to recognize the divine intelligence that's been guiding their entire incarnation. This is why Cayce emphasized that the dying are extraordinarily sensitive to the energy and intention behind every word spoken near them, even when they appear completely unresponsive. Your grandmother lying motionless in that hospital bed? She can hear you. Your father who hasn't opened his eyes in 3 days? He's absorbing every vibration of your voice. Cayce explained in his readings that the spiritual senses actually become heightened as physical senses diminish. The soul is preparing to operate without the limitations of a physical body, and in this preparation phase, it becomes acutely receptive to thought forms, emotional energies, and the spiritual content of language. This isn't merely comforting belief. Cayce documented case after case where the dying person's consciousness responded to specific words and intentions, even when medical science declared them beyond awareness. So what should you never say? The first and most damaging phrase is anything that begs them to stay, to fight, to hold on for your sake. When you lean over that bed and whisper, "Please don't leave me, I need you, you have to keep fighting," you're creating energetic chains that bind their soul to a body that's completing its purpose. Cayce's readings were explicit about this. The soul knows when its time has come, when the lessons of this particular incarnation are complete, when the physical vehicle can no longer serve its spiritual mission. Asking someone to remain in a deteriorating body, Tianlong suffering for your emotional comfort, is, however well-intentioned, a form of spiritual violence. Think about that for a moment. Every time you say, "Don't give up," what you're really asking is for them to resist the very process their soul has been preparing for across multiple lifetimes. Cayce taught that death is graduation, not tragedy. The soul doesn't give up when it transitions. It ascends to its next classroom in the eternal school of spiritual evolution. When you frame their transition as defeat, as something to fight against, you're projecting your fear onto their sacred journey. And that fear becomes a vibrational obstacle they must overcome in order to pass peacefully through the veil. The second destructive pattern Cayce warned against is expressing fear, panic, or desperate attachment in the presence of the dying. Your terror at losing them, they feel it. Your refusal to let go, it creates confusion in their consciousness. Cayce explained that souls in transition are extraordinarily empathic. They can sense the emotional states of everyone in the room with an intensity that far exceeds normal human perception. When you fill the space around their bed with grief-stricken energy, with the vibration of, "This is terrible, this is the worst thing that could happen," you're essentially telling their soul that something is going wrong, that they should be afraid, that the beautiful reunion with Divine Source they're beginning to experience is somehow a catastrophe. Imagine preparing for the most important journey of your existence, finally seeing the light you've been moving toward your entire life, beginning to remember your true identity as an eternal spiritual being, and then being surrounded by people treating this moment like a horror. The dissonance between what the soul is experiencing, liberation, light, love, homecoming, and what it's sensing from loved ones, terror, loss, desperation, creates a kind of spiritual whiplash. Cayce documented cases where souls became disoriented during transition, lingering in confused states between dimensions, because the emotional chaos of the living created static in their reception of divine guidance. Here's what almost no one understands. When you're crying hysterically at the deathbed, when you're expressing profound anguish and treating their transition as an unbearable tragedy, you're not being authentic to the spiritual reality of what's happening. You're viewing the situation entirely through the distorted lens of physical attachment. Cayce would enter trance and describe what the departing soul actually experiences, not darkness and ending, but increasing light and continuation, not loss, but reunion with all they've loved across multiple incarnations, not termination of existence, but expansion into fuller awareness of who they've always been. The third critical error is discussing unresolved conflicts, bringing up past grievances or loading them with guilt about things left undone. "I'm sorry we fought. I wish you'd had more time with the grandchildren. If only you'd taken better care of yourself." Every statement that focuses on regret, incompletion, or what should have been different creates energetic weights the soul must carry as it attempts to rise into higher dimensions. Cayce's readings revealed that the consciousness of the dying becomes hyper-focused on spiritual evaluation. They're already reviewing their life, already understanding the patterns and purposes of their incarnation, already reconciling karmic debts and recognizing soul growth. When you interrupt this sacred self-assessment with your earthly perspective on what they did or didn't accomplish, you're imposing your limited judgment onto their expanding awareness. You're asking them to see their life through your disappointed or grief-stricken eyes, rather than through the lens of eternal soul progression. Cayce taught that every life, no matter how it appears from the outside, serves precise spiritual purposes. That person you think died too young or didn't fulfill their potential, their soul completed exactly what it came to complete. Your job isn't to make them feel bad about what they're leaving behind. It's to affirm the value of what they've experienced and give them spiritual permission to continue their journey. The fourth mistake is trying to extract promises or secure guarantees about the afterlife. "Promise me you'll watch over the kids. Send me a sign so I'll know you're okay. Make sure you come back to visit me." These desperate attempts to maintain connection across the veil reveal a fundamental misunderstanding of what Cayce actually taught about post-death consciousness. The soul that's transitioning needs to focus entirely on its own journey through the spiritual dimensions. Meeting with guides, reviewing the incarnation, understanding lessons learned, preparing for what comes next. When you burden them with assignments and obligations to perform from the other side, you're trying to keep them tethered to earth-plane concerns when they should be soaring into cosmic awareness. Cayce explained that communication between dimensions does happen, but it occurs according to spiritual laws and divine timing, not because you've guilted someone into making promises on their deathbed. The most loving thing you can do is release them completely. Give them total freedom to move into whatever the next phase of their existence requires, without the weight of your expectations. Trust that the bond between souls transcends physical death, that love is eternal and doesn't require contracts or promises. Your connection will continue, but not because they're working to send you signs, because you share a spiritual resonance that exists beyond time and space. Perhaps the most insidious error, though, is what Cayce called spiritual interference through doctrine. This happens when well-meaning people surround the dying with specific religious language urgent prayers for healing, or theological frameworks that don't align with the person's actual beliefs or spiritual understanding. Jesus is coming for you. You need to accept him right now. If you don't pray this prayer, you won't go to heaven. God is going to heal you if you just have enough faith. These statements, even when delivered with genuine concern for someone's eternal soul, create enormous confusion and pressure during a time when consciousness needs clarity and peace. Cayce's readings revealed that souls transition according to their own spiritual development and understanding, not according to last-minute doctrinal compliance. The divine intelligence that created all consciousness doesn't operate on the transactional basis that some theological systems propose. What matters in the moment of transition is the love you've embodied, the growth you've achieved, the awareness you've developed, not whether you've recited specific words or adhered to particular beliefs in your final hours. When you pressure someone who's dying to adopt your religious framework, you're prioritizing your theological comfort over their spiritual sovereignty. Think about the arrogance embedded in that approach. Someone has lived 70, 80, 90 years developing their own relationship with the divine, their own understanding of spiritual reality, their own path of soul evolution, and then, in their final hours, you decide your job is to convince them they've been wrong all along, that unless they see it your way right now, they're in danger? Cayce would describe this as one of the most egotistical and spiritually damaging things you can do to someone in transition. It creates fear where there should be peace, doubt where there should be certainty, confusion where there should be clear movement toward the light. So what should you say instead? Cayce's readings provide remarkably specific guidance on this. The first principle is affirmation of the journey, speaking words that validate what they're experiencing and give them permission to move toward it. It's okay to go. You've lived a beautiful life. The light you're seeing is real. Move toward it. These simple statements align with the actual spiritual reality of transition. They confirm rather than contradict what the soul is perceiving. They remove obstacles rather than creating them. The second principle is expressing gratitude for their presence in your life, without making that gratitude a chain that binds them to you. There's a profound difference between "Thank you for everything you've given me," "I'll carry your love with me always," and "I can't live without you. Please don't leave me alone." The first statement honors the relationship while releasing them. The second statement demands they sacrifice their spiritual progression for your emotional security. Cayce taught that love liberates, fear imprisons. Which energy are you bringing to their bedside? The third principle is invoking the highest spiritual assistance available while respecting the person's autonomy and beliefs. Cayce recommended prayers that call upon divine light, spiritual guides, and protective forces to ease the transition, but always in alignment with the person's own spiritual understanding. If they believe in Christ consciousness, you might pray for Christ's loving presence to guide them. If they resonate with universal light, you invoke that. If they have no formal beliefs, you simply ask that they be surrounded by love and peace. The specific words matter less than the intention behind them, that they experience a smooth, luminous passage into the next dimension of existence. The fourth principle is maintaining peaceful, loving energy in the space, regardless of what you're feeling internally. This doesn't mean suppressing your grief. It means not projecting it onto them during their sacred process. Cayce explained that you can hold someone's hand, you can tell them you love them, you can sit in quiet presence, but your energy should communicate, "I'm here with you, I support your journey, I trust the divine process that's unfolding." They need to feel your love without feeling your desperate need for them to stay. This is perhaps the hardest spiritual practice most people will ever face. Loving someone enough to want what's best for their soul, even when it means letting them go. Now I want you to pause and ask yourself something uncomfortable. When you imagine being at the bedside of someone you love who's dying, what's your honest impulse? Is it to make it easier for them or easier for you? Is it to support their transition or to prevent it? Most people, if they're brutally honest, realize their instinct is to fight death, to see it as the enemy, to feel like peaceful acceptance equals giving up. And that's exactly the consciousness Cayce spent his life trying to transform. Death isn't the enemy. Spiritual ignorance is. Fear isn't natural. It's learned. The panic you feel at the thought of someone dying isn't love, it's attachment, and there's a difference. Cayce documented thousands of readings about consciousness after death, and here's what they all pointed to. The quality of your transition is determined largely by the consciousness you bring to it. Someone who dies in peace, surrounded by loving, supportive energy, with spiritual permission to continue their journey. That soul moves smoothly through the various dimensions, quickly orienting to their new state of existence, easily connecting with guides and loved ones on the other side, rapidly progressing to whatever comes next. Someone who dies amid chaos, resistance, desperate attachment, fear, and spiritual confusion, that soul struggles, becomes disoriented, sometimes lingers in lower vibrational states because the energetic debris of the death experience creates obstacles they have to work through before they can fully transition. This means your words, your energy, your consciousness at someone's deathbed doesn't just affect their final moments in a body, it affects the beginning of their next phase of existence. You have the power to create heaven or hell for them, not in some distant afterlife, but in the immediate post-death experience. This is why Cayce emphasized that attending the dying is a spiritual practice of the highest order. You're serving as a midwife for the soul, helping birth it into the next dimension. Just as you wouldn't scream at a woman in labor that she's abandoning you, that she needs to stop this process, that she should be ashamed for bringing change, you don't do this to someone birthing themselves into spiritual reality. Let me share what Cayce said happens when you get this right. When someone transitions surrounded by peaceful, loving, spiritually aware energy, when the people at their bedside understand they're supporting a sacred journey rather than suffering a terrible loss, something remarkable occurs. The dying person often becomes visibly peaceful, even radiant in their final hours. They may speak of seeing beautiful light, of recognizing loved ones who've passed, of feeling profound love and welcome. Their breathing eases, their body relaxes. There's a palpable sense that they're already more present in the spiritual dimension than the physical one. And when they take that final breath, it's not a tragic ending, it's a gentle completion, like falling asleep after a long, purposeful day. Contrast that with deathbeds characterized by medical heroics, desperate emotional attachment, and spiritual ignorance. The dying person's face shows strain. Their breathing is labored and anxious. They seem to be fighting something. Their consciousness appears confused, torn between the pull toward the light and the chains of attachment keeping them bound to failing flesh. Even when the body finally ceases functioning, there's a sense of incompletion, of struggle, of unresolved energy hanging in the room. This is the difference between supported transition and obstructed transition, and it all comes down to whether the living understand what's actually happening and how to help rather than hinder. Here's what almost no one wants to confront. The way we handle death in modern culture is spiritually catastrophic. We've medicalized it to the point of absurdity. We've removed all sacred ritual and understanding. We've taught people to see it as failure rather than completion. And we've created a collective consciousness around death that's based entirely on fear, denial, and desperate attachment to physical form. Then we wonder why people have traumatic, complicated, difficult deaths. It's not mysterious. We're creating exactly the experience our consciousness supports. Cayce taught that ancient cultures understood death as a sacred transition and treated it with appropriate reverence. There were specific prayers, specific rituals, specific ways of supporting the dying that aligned with spiritual reality. The Egyptians, the Tibetans, indigenous cultures around the world, they all had wisdom about this process that we've discarded in favor of medical intervention and emotional chaos. And the cost of this ignorance isn't just felt by the dying, it's felt by everyone left behind, struggling with complicated grief, guilt about what they said or didn't say, confusion about where their loved one is now, fear about their own eventual death. If you want to transform your relationship with death, you have to start by questioning every assumption you've absorbed from a death-phobic culture. Is death really a tragedy? Or is that just a story you've been told? Is keeping someone alive in a suffering body really an act of love? Or is it selfish attachment? Is the moment of death the end of relationship or the transformation of relationship? Is grief the only appropriate response, or can there be grief alongside joy for the soul's liberation? These aren't theoretical questions. They're the most practical spiritual inquiries you'll ever engage, because at some point you will stand at a deathbed, and what you believe about these questions will determine whether you help or hurt the soul transitioning before you. Cayce's readings offer something our culture desperately needs: a coherent, spiritually grounded understanding of what death actually is and how to support it. Death is the soul's release from a physical classroom it has completed. The body is a temporary vehicle for consciousness. When the vehicle wears out or fulfills its purpose, the driver doesn't cease to exist. They simply exit the vehicle. The person you love isn't the body lying in that bed. They're the eternal consciousness that has been using that body. And that consciousness is about to experience the most profound liberation it's known since entering physical form decades ago. When you understand this, everything changes. You stop seeing death as loss and start seeing it as transition. You stop fighting the process and start supporting it. You stop making it about your needs and start making it about their journey. You stop filling the room with fear and start creating a space of sacred peace. You become a spiritual ally instead of an energetic obstacle. And here's what Cayce promised. When you learn to do this, when you learn to be truly present with death as a spiritual practice, it transforms not just the dying person's experience, but your own consciousness. You begin to lose fear of your own death. You develop a more expansive understanding of existence. You stop living in denial of mortality and start living with awareness of eternity. The dying need you to be spiritually mature enough to handle their transition with grace. They need you to see beyond your own grief to the reality of their liberation. They need you to trust the divine process even when every cell in your body wants to scream against it. They need you to love them enough to let them go. Not reluctantly, not bitterly, but with genuine blessing and joyful release. Can you do this? Can you actually sit at a deathbed and mean it when you say, "It's okay, you can go, move toward the light"? Or will you cling, beg, make their transition about your loss instead of their gain? I need to ask you directly, what are you willing to change about your relationship with death? Because unless you confront this now, unless you develop spiritual understanding before you're in crisis, you will default to cultural programming. You will panic. You will say the wrong things. You will create obstacles for someone you love when you should be clearing the path. The time to prepare for death, your own and others, isn't when someone is actively dying. It's now, in this moment, while you still have the clarity and space to examine your beliefs, transform your consciousness, and develop the spiritual maturity required to serve as a death midwife. Cayce emphasized that learning to support death gracefully is one of the most important spiritual practices available to human beings. It's how we demonstrate whether we've truly understood that consciousness is eternal, that love transcends form, that physical existence is just one chapter in an infinite story. It's where spiritual theory meets the most intense test of practical application. Talk is cheap. What matters is whether you can actually embody these truths when someone you love is taking their final breaths. If you've made it to this point in the video, you're clearly someone who takes spiritual truth seriously. You're not content with cultural platitudes and death denial. You want to understand reality even when it's uncomfortable. So let me leave you with this. The way you handle death, both your own eventual transition and the deaths of those you love, will be the ultimate expression of your spiritual development. It will reveal whether you've been playing at spirituality or actually transforming your consciousness. It will show whether your faith in eternal existence is genuine or just comforting fantasy. And it will determine whether you serve as a source of light or a source of obstruction for souls making the journey home. Your homework, if you're serious about this, is to sit with the questions Cayce's teachings raise. What do you actually believe happens at death? How do those beliefs affect how you would behave at a deathbed? What fears would you need to confront in order to support someone's transition with genuine peace? What attachments would you need to release? What spiritual practices would you need to develop? These aren't abstract philosophical questions. They're preparation for one of the most important roles you'll ever play in someone's life. How you answer them now will determine whether you're ready when the moment comes. Before we close, make sure you like and subscribe if this content is helping you develop a more mature, spiritually grounded understanding of existence. And leave a comment sharing what this video made you realize about your own relationship with death, because these conversations are how we collectively transform our consciousness around life's most sacred transition. The dying need us to evolve beyond fear. Are you willing to do the work? The pyramids were never tombs, and the civilization that built them possessed technology that would make modern engineers weep with envy. Edgar Cayce, while in his legendary trance states, revealed something that shatters every history book you've ever read. The Great Pyramid of Giza was constructed over 10,500 years ago by survivors of Atlantis, and its true purpose had nothing to do with burying pharaohs. These ancient architects wielded knowledge of sound, light, and consciousness itself, technologies we're only beginning to rediscover today. The granite chambers weren't designed for corpses, but for initiation ceremonies that transformed human consciousness and connected seekers directly with divine wisdom. Every hieroglyph, every passage, every mathematical proportion was encoded with spiritual knowledge meant to survive the ages and guide humanity through its darkest periods. If the conventional narrative about enslaved workers dragging stones is a comfortable lie, then what does that say about everything else history claims to know about our past, and about the spiritual potential locked within you right now? Share in the comments. Have you ever felt an inexplicable connection to ancient Egypt, as if you once walked those sacred halls yourself? History wants you to believe that the Great Pyramid was built around 2500 BCE by Pharaoh Khufu using primitive copper, tools and enslaved labor. But Cayce's readings shatter this comfortable fiction with revelations so profound that they rewrite humanity's entire timeline. The pyramid, he explained during his psychic trances, stands as a monument to a far older and more spiritually advanced civilization, one that understood the fundamental nature of reality itself. Cayce revealed that the Great Pyramid was constructed approximately 10,090 to 10,390 BCE, during a period when survivors of the doomed continent of Atlantis sought to preserve their most sacred knowledge before their homeland sank beneath the waves. These weren't primitive Stone Age peoples stumbling through the darkness of prehistory. They were masters of what we might call physics, consciousness technology, and the manipulation of natural forces through spiritual attunement. The lead architect, according to Cayce's readings, was a high priest named Rata, who worked in concert with an Atlantean engineer named Hermes to create a structure that would serve multiple revolutionary purposes across millennia. Think about what mainstream archaeology asks you to accept: that ancient Egyptians, supposedly using only copper chisels and wooden mallets, quarried, transported, and precision-placed over 2 million limestone blocks, some weighing up to 80 tons, with such mathematical exactitude that modern laser equipment can barely detect the seams between stones. The tolerances achieved in the King's Chamber are tighter than what most contemporary construction can accomplish. Does this sound like the work of a civilization we're told was technologically primitive? Cayce's readings provide a far more logical explanation. The Atlantean refugees who designed the pyramid possessed knowledge of what he called the natural laws, an understanding of vibration, resonance, and the connection between consciousness and physical matter. In his trance states, Cayce described how massive stones were moved using sound frequencies that could temporarily alter their gravitational properties. These weren't mystical fairy tales, but practical applications of principles that quantum physics is only now beginning to glimpse. The builders didn't fight against the weight of stone. They changed its relationship to the earth itself through harmonic resonance. But here's what makes this truly revolutionary. The pyramid was never intended as a tomb. Every Egyptian pharaoh who actually wanted to be buried built elaborate tombs filled with treasures, inscriptions celebrating their deeds, and artwork depicting their journey to the afterlife. The Great Pyramid contains none of these elements. No mummy has ever been found within it, no treasure, no hieroglyphics covering the walls like in actual Egyptian tombs. Instead, Cayce explained, it was built as what he called a hall of records and an initiation temple, a place where spiritual seekers could undergo transformative experiences that would elevate their consciousness to perceive higher realities. The so-called King's Chamber wasn't a burial vault, but an initiation chamber. Cayce's readings describe how initiates would be placed within the granite sarcophagus, not in death, but in a controlled state that modern medicine might call a near-death experience or out-of-body state. Through carefully calibrated processes involving sound, geometric proportions, and spiritual preparation, the initiate's consciousness would separate from their physical body and travel to what ancient mystics called the heavenly realms, or what we might term higher dimensions of reality. They would receive direct knowledge from divine sources, encounter the records of their own soul's journey through many lifetimes, and return transformed, no longer merely human, but awakened to their nature as eternal spiritual beings. The pyramid's mathematical proportions weren't decorative choices or coincidences. Every measurement encodes profound knowledge. The structure's height multiplied by specific ratios gives you the distance from Earth to the Sun. The base perimeter divided by twice the height produces pi with stunning accuracy. The angles and passages align with celestial bodies at moments of cosmic significance. Cayce revealed that these weren't just clever architectural tricks. They were intentional encodings of scientific and spiritual principles that the builders knew humanity would need to rediscover in future ages. The pyramid is essentially a three-dimensional textbook written in stone, designed to survive any catastrophe that might befall human civilization. Consider the sophistication required for what Cayce described. The builders didn't just understand astronomy, they understood precession of the equinoxes, a cycle that takes 26,000 years to complete. They aligned the pyramid's passages to star systems that held spiritual significance in their cosmic understanding. The descending passage points to where the pole star was positioned in their era, not in the conventional construction date. This level of astronomical knowledge supposedly wasn't rediscovered until thousands of years later. Unless, of course, it wasn't a rediscovery at all, but a painful recovery of wisdom that was once common knowledge among the spiritually advanced Atlanteans. In Cayce's readings, he explained that 3 pyramid structures were built in Egypt during this ancient period, the Great Pyramid being the largest and most significant. But there's something even more intriguing. Cayce spoke of a hall of records hidden beneath the Sphinx, containing the complete history of Atlantis, its spiritual technologies, and prophecies about humanity's future. According to his visions, this chamber would be discovered when humanity had evolved sufficiently to use such knowledge wisely rather than destructively. As of today, that chamber remains officially undiscovered, or at least unannounced. Makes you wonder what might be hidden from public knowledge, doesn't it? The purpose of encoding all this knowledge wasn't mere preservation for intellectual curiosity. Cayce stressed that the pyramid builders were operating under divine guidance, following a plan that extended far beyond their individual lifetimes. They knew that humanity would pass through cycles of rising and falling, periods of enlightenment followed by ages of spiritual darkness. The pyramid would stand as an anchor point, a permanent reminder that humans once achieved greatness through spiritual alignment rather than material conquest. It would wait patiently through millennia of ignorance, ready to reveal its secrets when seekers asked the right questions. What happened to these advanced Atlanteans? Cayce's readings paint a sobering picture. Their civilization fell not because of technological inadequacy, but because of spiritual corruption. They possessed incredible powers, the ability to generate energy, manipulate matter, and even influence consciousness itself. But a portion of their society began using these gifts for selfish ends. This created an imbalance so severe that it triggered catastrophic geological events. The continent was destroyed in stages, with different groups of refugees fleeing to various parts of the world, some to Egypt, others to the Americas, still others to various regions where they attempted to preserve and pass on fragments of their knowledge. This explains something that has long puzzled archaeologists. Why do ancient civilizations across the globe, supposedly isolated from each other, share remarkably similar myths about flood catastrophes, gods who came from the sea bringing knowledge, and golden ages of wisdom that preceded recorded history? Cayce's readings offer a coherent explanation. These weren't independent mythologies, but fragmented memories of actual events, carried by Atlantean diaspora to different lands where the stories evolved over generations into the legends we know today. The Egyptian civilization that conventional history recognizes, the pharaohs, the hieroglyphics, the elaborate death rituals, was itself a remnant culture trying to keep alive spiritual practices they no longer fully understood. They revered the pyramid because their ancestral memory recognized it as sacred, but they had lost the keys to its deeper purposes. It's like finding a computer from an advanced civilization and worshipping it as a holy object, while having no idea how to actually use it. The later Egyptians could build impressive structures, certainly, but they couldn't replicate the precision, scale, or spiritual sophistication of the Great Pyramid. None of their later constructions even come close. Think about your own life for a moment. How much of what you've been taught about reality, about human potential, about the nature of consciousness itself, might be just as mistaken as the pyramid as tomb narrative? If mainstream history got something this fundamental wrong, and refuses to seriously consider evidence that contradicts the comfortable story, what else might they be missing or deliberately ignoring? Cayce emphasized that the pyramid wasn't built for the people of its own time. It was built for us, for seekers in the modern age who would question official narratives and search for deeper truth. The structure was designed to withstand not just physical erosion, but the erosion of knowledge itself, the dark ages when humanity would forget its own spiritual heritage. And here we are, in an era when technology has advanced, but spiritual wisdom has atrophied, when we can send messages around the world instantly, but struggle to find meaning in our own lives. The teachings encoded in the pyramid's very stones speak to something Cayce returned to again and again in his readings. Humanity is not a cosmic accident, stumbling blindly through a meaningless universe. We are spiritual beings undergoing a material experience, and that experience has purpose. The pyramid stands as proof that advanced souls walk this earth, that divine wisdom can be accessed through proper spiritual preparation, and that the universe operates according to laws that embrace both physics and consciousness. According to Cayce, the initiation experiences within the pyramid weren't meant to create an elite class of spiritual masters hoarding secrets. Quite the opposite. They were designed to awaken individuals to their true nature so they could return to society as teachers, healers, and lights in the darkness. The ultimate purpose was to raise the consciousness of humanity as a whole. Each person who underwent the transformative experience in the King's Chamber carried that elevated awareness back into the world, gradually lifting the spiritual vibration of the entire civilization. This brings us to perhaps the most challenging question Cayce's revelations pose. If such advanced knowledge existed and was deliberately preserved for future generations, why does modern humanity seem so disconnected from it? Why are we, despite all our technological sophistication, still grappling with the same fundamental questions about meaning, purpose, and the nature of death that haunted our ancestors? Cayce would say we've lost our way, not because the knowledge disappeared, but because we stopped seeking it with sincere hearts. The wisdom is still there, encoded in sacred sites hidden in ancient texts, whispered through mystical traditions that survived the purges of dogmatic religion. But it requires something of us, a willingness to question everything we think we know, a commitment to inner transformation rather than just intellectual collection of information, and the courage to face truths that might shatter our comfortable worldviews. The pyramid's message is ultimately one of hope, wrapped in a challenge. Its massive stones proclaim that human beings, when aligned with divine purpose, can accomplish what seems impossible. That consciousness is not merely a byproduct of brain chemistry, but a fundamental force in the universe, capable of influencing matter itself. That death is not an ending but a transition, and that the life you're living right now is part of a much larger journey your soul is undertaking across many incarnations. Mainstream archaeology will continue teaching that primitive Egyptians built tombs for their kings, because accepting Cayce's version would require rewriting not just history books, but our entire understanding of human civilization and potential. It would mean acknowledging that we're not the pinnacle of human achievement,